Great. Well, first, I would love to thank you and welcome everyone for joining the conversation today. I am very excited to introduce our speaker, Diana Clark, who is our president at Intent Clinical. Diana is a nationally recognized family recovery advocate with over 2 decades of experience helping families navigate the emotional and relational complexity that often accompanies behavioral health and substance use challenges. She graciously leads our team of over 400 professionals that are across the country and internationally, providing expert guidance to individuals and families facing uncertainty, complexity, and emotionally charged transitions. Today's webinar, Diana is going to explore how power, status, and privilege can quietly distort care and what we as professionals can do to stay clinically and ethically grounded when working with high-profile clients. So thank you again for joining. Diana, I'm going to pass the conversation over to you.
Thank you, Laura. So we're talking about the VIP syndrome, and I first heard about the VIP syndrome about 5 or 6 years ago as I was seeking as a concierge behavioral health support person to receive benefits for the client that wouldn't have otherwise been given. And the clinician whom I was in front of smiled at me and said, VIP syndrome. And I didn't quite understand what she was saying, but I hurried back home and I looked at that particular concept and my bell rang. I felt like, okay, this is really important stuff. It's really important to know when we are approaching people with power and wealth and influence that we actually give them the care they deserve and not necessarily the care they ask for. When we think about VIPs, we tend to assume that people with wealth and power and influence and even beauty and celebrity receive better care than normal folk. They receive more attentive care, they might receive more personalized care, but is that care actually more effective? The data tends to tell a different story. In fact, individuals on both ends of that economic spectrum, those with the least resources and those with the most, tend to receive the worst care. And so I was very flummoxed by this and really wanted to know why. And that was, as the research would indicate, because in both cases, clinical judgment, honesty, and transparency can be distorted. At one end, it's limited by bias and stigma and resource scarcity. And on the other hand, it is, for those with wealth, it is distorted by deference, fear, and over accommodation. So let's talk about the way this surfaces. That's me, you all know that. When I am working with families of power, high net worth, celebrity, I have a little post-it note that I sit with on my lamp that says truth to power. And this is because it seemed essential to me, for me, that I not shift unconsciously into accommodating what they want. The culmination of their status can lead to boundary softening, shifted roles, and truly a shading of truth and avoidance of confrontation. And this presentation is really about how do we stay grounded in truth and clarity. And honestly, how do we really care about people who can present a facade of power, who can be intoxicating to be around them because of the light they shine? How do we care about that inner struggle that they, or their needs, whether they are financial, whether those needs are familial, whether those needs are clinical? How do we stay grounded in truth? So the VIP syndrome tends to surface when we start making small, maybe small, get bigger accommodations, bypassing standard intake procedures, avoiding difficult conversations, making exceptions to protocol just this once, delaying or omitting formal documentation out of concern about how it might be received, granting direct access to personal information when that is not your practice. As somebody in a concierge practice where these things are part of the practice, I am available to my clients 24/7. That is who I'm available to all the time. But it isn't that one VIP get special care. That's the key. If we work in a practice that says we are open from 9 to 5 and we do not vary outside of that, and there's a referral that comes in and it says VIP, they need access hours. That's the first checkpoint. Do we do this? And if we do, how do we do it without compromising care? We can all accommodate. We can all look at how do we meet people where they are? How do we build rapport based on what they currently live? But we need to make sure we're not compromising care. So, clinical and ethical implications when we are trying to give people information they want to hear, we undermine our diagnostic clarity. We veer into those ethical gray zones of saying when there is a 90% chance that they might have something, to focus on the 10 of the not. And what happens is that clinicians can actually find themselves feeling just as distorted. They erode our core of our professional self. If we are giving advice, whether that's financial advice, whether that is clinical advice, whether that is therapeutic or coaching advice, if we are giving advice that is counter to our sense of values, counter to the sense of why we were hired, counter to the sense of good judgment, then we risk ourselves. And then we get into countertransference. For those of you on this webinar who are not in the clinical realm, countertransference is a term of art which basically talks about that we listen with our own biases, our own prejudice. We impute to other people certain characteristics based on those biases, and we hear things based on our own personal experience. And when we are working with people of very high net worth or power or celebrity, it is easy to ascribe to them characteristics that they may or may not have. We might start idealizing them. They wouldn't have been in this position if they weren't smart. We might idealize the idea that, well, they made $1 billion, they must have every resource at their fingertips. Why would I disagree with the information they have received? We may be feeling guilty or a sense of obligation in saying no. We may worry about loss of a client if we start holding up a mirror that isn't as attractive as they may want. They may start to resent us, frankly, and we may start to resent them. We can over-identify when we're in the actual room with power and beauty and celebrity. It is easy to start thinking that you have those traits as well. I want us to all remember we are all here to serve, whether that is somebody who is, struggling with a substance use disorder on the side of the road, or that is somebody in our office who looks at us and looks like they have everything together. We are here to serve, and service can only be done on a one-way street. So when a client is a provider, so let's imagine that you have a client that comes in, and for wealth advisors, it might be somebody who is a wealth advisor. And for clinicians, it might be clinicians. For MDs, it might be MDs. And because of their expertise, we may once again attribute to them knowledge. We may attribute to them a sense that they may know better than us, even though they're seeking our opinion. We may seek to gain their approval of our opinion instead of delivering it in a way that is just plain for them. And there is also this idea when we're colleagues that the professional familiarity can blur the distinction between who is getting what treatment here, who is getting what, who is the advice for? Always the question. Blurred boundaries. Power proximity distorts our instincts. Feeling chosen by somebody can generate a loyalty in a protective way. Invitations to events, gifts, favors, blur lines. We have a practice at Intent Clinical where we do not accept gifts. I've been offered really good concert tickets. I've been offered really good professional advice. I've been offered all kinds of things that I have felt the need to say, no, this relationship is a one-way street. You receive, I deliver. And in that delivery, we are really obligating ourselves to be forthright and honest. So anytime, anytime we're asking the question of ourselves, should I accept this gift? Should I accept this favor? Can I use this contact? Ask yourself who benefits from this action or decision, the client, the provider, or the system around them? Is it serving clinical goals, emotional comfort, reputational interests? All of those things are valid, but they need to serve the interests of the client. Interests of the client. So in the behavioral health system, there are, and have been throughout the years, beautiful websites, beautiful pictures of beautiful resources, a description of anything that anybody would want in a treatment program. And when you visit, you find not necessarily what the brochure looked like, not what the website looked like. The clinical team wasn't exactly as advertised. And it is really important to understand that while programs might provide comfortable environments for VIPs, and that's fine, no question about that. People should be comfortable as they can be while they're getting well. What we also know is that the driving force needs to be the clinical care, the clinical work, not the comfort. If comfort is what somebody is seeking, if they're looking for wellness and spa services, then wellness and spa services should be where they go. If they need clinical support, then we should look at places that might offer some of the spa services, but be focusing on the clinical support. So the promise of high touch, personalized care can intentionally mask risk or clinical limitations. Families expect more information, more control, and that family expectation can be incredibly difficult to navigate. Providers may feel a pressure to deliver a seamless experience that is basically looking at shifts in roles and scopes and transparency, and we need clinical framing in order to do it well. So what do? We check ourselves. We check ourselves once, we check ourselves twice. Is my recommendation based solely on a client's best interest? Would I make the same decision without the same influence, visibility, or access? Am I hesitating to speak openly, again, truth to power, in order to maintain rapport, avoid discomfort, or protect the relationship? Am I aware of how my own beliefs or assumptions about wealth may be shaping this interaction? And I have a few scripted lines I use. I have used with a smile, jokingly, you're paying me for advice. You're not paying me to tell you what you want to hear. This can be a relationship where I can speak truth and you can have whatever reaction you want to. This is a relationship that is 100% for your benefit and not for ours. Best practices. If you have standardized practices, stick to them unless it's clinically indicated. Make sure, if you are a sole practitioner, if you are out there in an office by yourself or you're managing high power clients by yourself, make sure you have collegial support or supervision. Check yourself with other people. We lie to ourselves. Unwittingly, we may not wish to, but it's really important to say to somebody else, I really think that the client who offered tickets wants me there clinically for good support. And to have somebody look you in the eye and go, yeah, right. And say, how is that benefiting them? Truly. Team-based models. If we are sharing work with other colleagues, we have the potential to catch each other in bias. We have the potential to catch each other's decision-making when things tend to go awry. And boundaries, name them early and reinforce them consistently. Boundaries don't have to be rigid and they don't have to not take into account the people we are seeing, but to offer a boundary and say, here are the hours I'm available, here are the hours that I text. Live with those, live with them. You can have backup plans, you can have all kinds of resources for people, but it's really important to respect your own lines if you've created them. Creating structures that support accountability. Training. Laura is going to put some good articles on this VIP syndrome in the chat, because read about it, get educated, understand how bias and people's influence impact what we do. Look at the client's broader ecosystem and even your own. We get referrals from people who help those of high net worth. We feel very propelled and compelled to deliver excellent service so that the resource who referred to us shines brightly as well. So make sure that you're checking with the resource. What are your expectations about the way we would handle this? Normalize the impact of status and power in your practices. Foster on a culture of shared responsibility. Status should inform, not distort care, and status should inform. We don't want people to walk into a therapeutic office and receive the message, whether actual or implied, what are you doing here? You have the world by the tail. And that happens. We do that all the time in clinical realms. And collaborate on safeguards of care. Clinical excellence requires ethical humility. And I'd love to talk a little bit about the intersection between advising and delivering of care. I have a friend whose father was in treatment for cancer. He was getting surgery. And prior to the surgery, it became evident in the hospital that he needed to detoxify from alcohol. So the surgery was pushed off. And because he was a high profile client, because he was likable, because he was charming, because he had this glow of success around him, his substance use disorder was missed. It was never discussed by the physicians. His family was able to shield it. Well, the doctors never said anything. And it became incumbent upon one member of the family to shout loudly, wait, what are we missing here? And if as professionals we're hearing of information and red flags like detox, DUIs, hospitalizations for eating disorders, and other things that bespeak a problem, we need to gather our wits so that we can address it. In the eating disorder realm, VIP syndrome shows its face in ways that is slightly different than in other medical realms. because of our body conscious and advertising, social media, everybody wants to look a certain way, and that has become normalized. So surgeries, certain practices that are not clinically appropriate are prescribed and undergone for people in this category that actually can lead to harmful results. So I am going to stop share so that we can have a discussion. That's my goal. Questions? That's the didactic piece. Now I want to have a conversation. I can talk about particular incidents where this has come up. I can talk about case studies, but I'd love to know a little bit from the audience what would be most powerful for them. Anybody have a question?
So we have a few questions here in the Q&A that I can read off. And everyone, please feel free to share your questions, whether it's through the chat or the Q&A, and we'll continue to go through them and address as many as we can. So here's one here, Diana. What do you do when the system around the client is more invested in image than supporting the care plan?
So what do you do? I think one of the reasons I love the work I do is because I work with those who are supporting the individual who is resisting the care plan. So I have the opportunity to once again speak truth to power and say, you are rejecting a care plan, and you may well be thinking you're loving your loved one. You may be thinking you're protecting their image. You might be thinking you're protecting their well-being, but really what you are protecting is dysfunction from treatment. And I think we can do that kindly, and I think we can do it with empathy and care, but I think we have to do it.
Mm. That's such a good point, and I also think it goes to this next question here, which certainly I think will help give some insight on how internally we've been able to address similar situations. How do you train newer clinicians to stay clinically grounded, especially when they feel impressed or intimidated by client status?
Supervision, supervision, supervision. Younger clinicians or younger providers who have new access to wealth need to be very careful of themselves. They need to understand the lure of it, the intoxication of it, the glow that seems to envelop the people who treat them, and they need supervision. There are also some very good books out there and good resources about how do you stay grounded in a moment when you're feeling like, I want to just tell them what they want to hear.
It's a really good point. We have some more that are coming in too that I think also speak to this. And this is an interesting perspective. In collaborative teams, how do we, who are not therapeutic professionals, ensure these same elements? Too often, given that we have different professional codes, they see within financial advisory settings, they typically shy away from these topics.
So I think that it's a slightly more nuanced conversation when you're not dealing in a clinical setting. Of course, you wouldn't say, go invest in that swampland in the desert. That would be, even if they want that swampland, even if they have pretty, pretty pictures, you would caution them. When it comes to mental health, behavioral health, and physical health, I think it bespeaks anybody who collaborates on a team to have resources at the ready, to be able to say, this is beyond my expertise, but I'm concerned. Would you like a resource? I think that in and of itself is speaking the truth.
I'm going to piggyback off that question too. Um, And I'm curious on your perspective around when there are gaps in communication across multidisciplinary teams, how is that typically navigated or addressed on all ends?
So when there are gaps in communication, when people aren't collaborating as a team, the very things we're trying to treat, the very reasons that somebody is in our care becomes um, less than ideal. The care becomes less than ideal. People need that collaboration. We need to hold each other accountable. We need to be able to say, you're managing this, I'll manage this. How do we align messaging together? Because if one person in a collaborative effort, whether that be a trustee, whether that be a wealth advisor, whether that be a medical provider or a clinician, if one person in that squad, so to speak, is saying, you can avoid the heavy lifting, you can do it softer, gentler, easier, they're going to take that road because we all will.
Mm, that absolutely makes sense. We have another good question here. Is there something called financial normalization?
Probably, and I don't know the answer to that. Financial normalization, I don't know.
I have another good question here as well. Are there ever concerns that you as a clinician may get wrapped up into a very public problem that gets revealed about your client? In other words, a concern that it may be bad publicity or have legal implications for the clinician.
Do we ever get concerned about that? We should
Mhm.
all be concerned about that when we're dealing with anybody, first of all. If we're delivering care, we should be darn sure that the type of care that we are delivering could be on the front page of a newspaper, whether that is a celebrity client or a hedge fund manager. Okay. So it's more likely to happen with a higher net worth and a higher public profile, but we should all be delivering care that we would not be embarrassed to have it on the page of a newspaper. We shouldn't be taking gifts from our clients in ways that would show bias of our opinions. Just the appearance. If we are invited to travel with a client to do some clinical work or to be a companion or some other realm that is clinically appropriate, that's a clinical service. It
Mm.
needs to remain such, not a best friend, not a buddy necessarily, but a clinical service. When we deal with people of high net worth who actually are getting well and feel enthused about their progress and want to invest in a behavioral health company, don't let them. That is one of those things. Investment in behavioral health companies should be done by the financial advisors. That should be their avenue. That's their pillar of responsibility, not ours.
Mm.
When we accept investments from our clients, we are in and of itself making ourselves vulnerable to shading advice.
That's a really great point. I think that also ties into the next question here, that highlights different systems or trainings that can be in place across any professional setting. What language or framework do you use internally to normalize conversations around bias?
So I like to start, when I'm talking about bias, I really like to start with the idea that we're all bozos on this bus. Some of us are prettier, some of us have a lot of money, some of us have power, but we're all humans. And because we're all humans, we all struggle with pain, we all struggle with disappointment, we all struggle. And when money isn't the issue, the struggle can be larger, the struggle can be more internal. And we have to be able to check the idea that people with power and wealth don't struggle. We have to.
Mm.
And so I ask, what would you feel constantly? What would you feel if this were your life in this moment where you have a loved one who's struggling, where you have a client who is very, very ill, where you have what looks a like they have a charmed life, look below, look beneath.
Our next question here. What do you do when your clinical recommendations are consistently overridden by family or legal advisors?
That's a great question. So, first, I would talk to the client and say, you know, we have a clinical opinion. Your doctors have a clinical opinion. Your psychiatrist has a clinical opinion. Your therapist has a clinical opinion about your clinical problem. Where do you see yourself accepting help? If they say, I can take it here, and I will accept it, then we look at, is that a helpful strategy? And then we go to the lawyer, and then we go to the trustee, and then we talk about the reason why we have a clinical opinion. If the family and the advisors continue to overrule, then there may come a time where we say, when you're ready to really listen or participate in what every expert is telling you, we're willing to be there. But until that time, we can't collude with a plan that isn't working.
Mm.
And that's happened maybe once in my life. Yeah. And I'm old.
Thank you for sharing that. We have another question here that highlights discomfort, which we were talking about earlier on in the presentation. So, when you have a client who's invested more in maintaining control of their narrative rather than engaging in discomfort. So, we talked about the teams that are supporting the client, but what about when the client themselves um, is more interested in control of maintaining their narrative?
So I don't think this is unique to VIPs. I think many of us go into therapy and want to control the narrative. This is who I am. This is what I want to work on. Don't touch this part. It is the therapeutic skill and the advising skill that leads us to say, I know you want me to focus over here, but that's kind of a magic act, and we're going to focus here.
It's a great point. And I wonder about the the way that it is overwhelming to navigate the behavioral health system. In as a professional, it could be confusing and overwhelming. Now, for a family that's going through a crisis or someone who's experiencing this for the first time, what are some ways that folks can find that level of support or understand what avenues they have or systems they have available to them?
So I think anybody who has a concierge doctor, who has a wealth advisor, who has any of the status that we are talking about today has abundant people at their disposal. The question is, do they have people who will be neutral? Do they have people who will offer solutions that are contrary to what they necessarily want but still need? And do they have opinions by people who understand that maybe wealth, maybe power, maybe celebrity is in and of itself its own issue that is needs to get addressed in all of these realms?
Mm. Someone commented that that's a big one. So it sounds like it certainly resonates with a lot of folks that are experiencing similar situations with their clients.
Mhm.
We do have some more questions in here that I'll read off. So, what is the best way to work around giving the client the best care when the physician on the care team is the one that is starstruck and is cutting corners or skipping steps as a result? It's a tough question.
Well, somebody could highlight for the physician what got highlighted to me in a really gentle way, which is this is VIP syndrome at work. And it was gentle and it was understanding, but it was very clear that what I was asking for was contrary to what was good for the client in that clinician's opinion, and that I had more exploration to do of my own.
Mm,
So, in the case you're talking about, for the doctor, I would probably say, I understand, I get it. They're intoxicating, they are wonderful, they're charming, and all kinds of beautiful things, and you are in their glow. And I'm really worried about how do we deliver advice. It doesn't even have to be questioning the advice. It could just be how are we delivering it so that they can receive it.
mm. Diana compiled some really great resources for this presentation. I shared them in the chat. I'll continue to share them as well, and we'll send them out when we send the recording to everyone, so that maybe that could also be an avenue of sharing some resources with.
Sharing resources. That's right.
So, our next question, speaking of investing in treatment and recovery centers, can you talk about the increase of private equity in the field?
Um,
There's
wow.
some more to this one. So, how do we non-clinicians assess what treatment centers are ethical and operate with integrity, focused on outcomes? It's a great question.
These are great questions. And because I don't have the expertise to really know anymore who's doing excellent work out there beyond a few programs, I have people who research these things all day long. Who owns what programs right now? What has been the history of other programs they have owned? Is there a strategy that they tend to have that either cuts or increases the amount of services available to clients? The key for any recommendation that I have to make is in this world of private equity, when things are bought and sold, we have to really do our due diligence and not assume that the program that was one way is the same another week. It may not be.
Mhm. We also had a colleague who shared, I think, a great sentiment about this. And when talking to clients and offering different resources, it's all about informed consent.
Yeah,
And I thought that was a really great highlight.
absolutely. And going beyond the brochure, ask the questions. What are the clinical recommendations? What are the clinical degrees? How much experience? How long have people worked there? There are all kinds of ways we can vet programs, but we have to.
Absolutely. Another question that came in here. So, on occasion, others vested with clients at times work to appease the client, making our job more challenging instead of what is best for the client. What is your ideal way of handling this?
So I'm hugely fond of humor. I am hugely fond of being fairly direct. And the way I would probably address it is, you know, gotta ask who's benefiting here? Who's benefiting here? And that inquiry to start the conversation all the time works. Doesn't mean that somebody will own behavior. It doesn't mean that they won't understand that their vested interest in something is inappropriate, but they may start to examine their own role and what that vesting is.
Hmm. You highlighted this on one of your slides where you were talking about boundaries. There is a question to elaborate on examples of setting boundaries with clients who are used to 24/7 access care, especially in a concierge space.
So, again, most of you on this webinar, me personally, we're working with people who expect 24/7 care. That is what they are paying for. That is what a concierge practice may provide. That doesn't necessarily mean that the 24/7 care is always delivered by an individual practitioner. Coverage needs to be created and clients need to be communicated with. Here is when I'm available. Here is when you can expect coverage. Who will contact me if there is a medical emergency? Because we all get to have lives too. So being really clear about when you are there, what kinds of events you will go to. Is it appropriate to go to a client's wedding? Maybe, maybe not. Who invited you? Did the client invite you or his family invite you? So some of those situations we need to really look at. Are you comfortable with me being at your wedding would be the question.
That's a good, thoughtful response. Here's another really great question that I think you'll certainly be able to speak to. What interventions have helped you invite a client out of their curated identity and into meaningful self-reflection?
That's a great question. What have I used? I have used just about everything possible. I have used stories about musicians because I love to play music. Um, I have used, do you want truth or do you want me to be like everybody else in your life that tells you what you want to hear? You get that from people. I can tell you a different story. Which do you want? I ask it quite simply. I was on a Zoom with a very powerful man, and he had a very sick son. And on this Zoom were experts in all kinds of realms, from psychiatric to medical to financial to trust advising. And the, I'll call him Mr. Big. Mr. Big pipes up and says, as any idiot can agree, the following needs to happen. And I won't say what he said because that would not be appropriate. But I said, I raised my hand like a little second grader and I said, I don't think I'm an idiot, but I don't agree. I think we have to be able to put ourselves a little bit on the line and say, you know, you might think I'm an idiot, but I have 30 years of experience here, and my instincts tell me something different than what you want to hear. I think we can have empathy for the fact that they don't want to hear it. I think we can be caring when we deliver the news, but I think we deliver news.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with financial advisors who don't want to tell the people that they're serving that they're going to run out of money if they don't quit spending the way they are. They're ultimately going to run out of money. And they're like, I don't know how to deliver that message. And I'm like, honestly, and with support, because if they're getting ready to run out of money and it's a clinical issue, then they need support.
That's a great point and also speaks back to your slide around when the client is a provider and there is some expertise behind their profession as well and how that can, bring a wealth of insight, but also some challenges itself too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we have another question here. We have a couple coming in. Um, let's see.
Thank you all for these questions.
Really good questions. Oh, here's one following what you just mentioned. What if they are running out of money because of services?
Then they need to be supported to find services that they can afford.
Mm.
They need to be connected to supports. Our services, any of us, should not be running people broke, right? Our goal is to provide help.
Absolutely. And giving the space to have those conversations with clients openly.
Yeah.
Here's one here. How do you manage the tension between being accessible and being clinically boundaried in concierge or high touch models? So I think this is similar to that 24/7 access question.
So it's a great question. And how do I navigate it? I don't navigate it particularly well. I'm going to be very honest here. I err on the side of availability because that's who I am. Um, but I also know when I let a client know that I can only be available during emergencies during this one period of time. I'm going away for 5 minutes and I would like 5 minutes of peace. I won't answer the call then. I will send it to on call. That is how I navigate it.
Mm.
Part of the reason I don't work for myself entirely alone is because I need backup to be able to say, I may not be able to be there, but I trust the name of the person I'm giving you.
Absolutely. I think we have time for another question. This one here is a really great one, and I'm curious what you're going to say about it. Have you ever had to address a client's social media presence as a clinical risk factor?
Yes. And I wish I could say that I have a great understanding of a social media practice, but I have had to say, here is where you are public. In here, you need to be private, and I need you to be private. This is a private space. We don't talk about our work on social media. We don't put pictures of me and you together on social media. This is our work, and I would like to keep it private. And I think that any of us in both the medical, clinical, and all of those spaces can respect a private space.
Mm. Absolutely. So I think that comes to a close of our questions. Any last thoughts that you wanted to share, Diana?
I just think that we miss suffering and we miss problems and we miss humanity when we buy the facade. And so I encourage all of us who support, advise anybody, whether they have means or no means, to really see that we can do well by being honest, that we can do well by holding up a very compassionate example and mirror of what information can look like even when we don't want to hear it.
Hmm. And can certainly utilize the content from today to be able to share with teams, whether that helps with internal training or conversations amongst collaboration. So we will make sure to send this recording to everyone, and we'll also share the resources that were part of it as well. And within the chat, I also made sure everyone has our contact information. So if you do have any further questions about today's discussion, about Intent Clinical, about Diana, please feel free to reach out to us here. Thank you, Diana. Thank you for sharing your wealth of expertise with everyone.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.